Emily pressed her back to the cold stone and watched Jason step through the church door with Sarah's hand looped in his arm. Betrayal sat like a stone under her ribs and pushed her forward. She had not expected the ceremony to begin without a word. Voices rose inside the doorway, laughter, a hymn, and all of it felt arranged so she could not interrupt. A woman near the gate turned and said, "Emily, why are you here?" The question landed like a thrown dish. People stopped mid-step and glanced toward her. She stayed in the shadow of the old steps, coat pulled tight, because moving toward the crowd would ask for explanation. She had none. Her palms were damp where she clutched the strap of her bag. Emily had come thinking she might catch Jason alone after the rehearsal dinner, that she could say 2 sentences and leave with an answer. Instead, she had found a wedding already in progress and a town that knew how to watch. Emily knew the square by habit. Mrs. Larkin's hydrangeas, the bench by the fountain, Reverend Mallory's broad tie on Sundays. Those details should have made it possible to stand and breathe. Now each familiar object felt like a frame that revealed her standing outside whatever arrangement had been made without her. She stepped from the shadow, which drew quieter whispers from the clustered stone path. "Emily Carter, Mrs. Larkin," loud enough so several heads turned. "I didn't think you'd come back for this." The neighbor's voice carried a mixture of accusation and curiosity. It pushed other murmurs into life. Emily kept her face steady. Her hands tightened on the strap until the leather creased. She did not speak at first. Her choice to remain silent was not shame alone. She measured the room for what she could say without allowing Jason to smooth the story. When she finally answered, her voice was controlled. "I need to talk to Jason." Emily, now. The name left a small wake through the crowd. Someone near the nave shifted, and a hat tilted. Behind the doors a bell chimed. The newlyweds were still coming out. Watching Jason's shoulders as they moved through the doorway, Emily noticed how he avoided looking at her. He held himself as if light could be directed. The wedding band on his finger flashed in sunlight. For a moment she counted the ways their history had been tangible, the tiny chip on his molar from a teenage bicycle fall, the way he hummed a bit when he read a menu, and then she saw those private details displayed in public by someone else. Sarah stepped into the foyer in a cream dress that fit the town's idea of a bride. Her hair was sleek. She carried a structured clutch. When Sarah looked directly toward Emily, her face did not break. The look was not empty. It was measured. Emily felt a change. Suspicion tightened into something louder, anger she could name and act on. She moved through the crowd toward the door. People formed a loose barrier without thinking. A hand tried to steer her back. Emily freed her shoulder and pushed through. An usher said, "Miss Carter, you can't." She did not listen. She had to be seen and had to force whatever truth lived behind that clutch and those folded hands into the open. The foyer smelled of polished wood and lilies. The crowd was a movable wall of smiles and polite recognition. Jason's jaw worked once, and he stepped slightly away. He avoided her eyes and put up his hand as if to set a boundary. "Emily," Jason's voice steady, "this is not the—" "Not what, Jason?" She cut in. Her sentence was short, her throat tightened. The hymn from inside dropped like a curtain and left only the scrape of shoes and low talking. Sarah's fingers tightened on her bouquet for a half second. She nothing. Emily kept looking at her. The quiet on Sarah's face made no promises. A small shift happened then. Emily found proof. She had slipped away from the steps earlier, a slender motion to the side under the pretense of taking a breath. In a moment where the bridal party's bustle pulled attention inward, she had slipped into the room labeled bridal suite. The door was unlocked. On a dressing table she had expected tissues and pins. Instead she found her dainty silver locket tucked into a softly folded napkin, and a short folded note in Sarah's handwriting. She read 3 words aloud to the empty room, because she needed witnesses for the letters even if there were none. "I kept it." For us, Emily felt the first shift of the day, confusion condensed into fact. The locket was hers. She had worn it since a summer, when a boy had promised forever and then left town. The chain was the small proof of a promise that no longer existed. The note meant this meeting was not accidental. She ran her thumb along the locket's edge and tasted salt on it, tears she had not felt coming. She closed her fingers around the chain so the metal warmed against her palm. The discovery moved her from a spectator to an actor. She could not leave it as a rumor. Outside, the square still buzzed. Someone clapped as the couple passed through the courtyard. Emily walked back into the doorway, carrying the locket like a new weight. The crowd parted with small gasps when they saw her face. "You need to explain," she said loudly to Jason and Sarah, holding up the locket so the polished light caught on its face. Her voice cut through the polite hum. Jason's mouth opened and closed. He glanced at Sarah and then at the people around them. For the first time, he did not move to smooth the moment. That lack of smoothing felt deliberate and made Emily feel sharper. "Emily, it's complicated." Jason began. "Complicated?" A woman near the fountain echoed. "We watched you in the bakery for months, Jason. Why is this complicated?" Sarah put her hand over her mouth. Her composure shifted. A line of sweat appeared at her temple. Emily stepped forward. Sarah, don't say it like that. Tell them how it started. Tell them you kept my things and hid them." Her words were quick, each one chosen to remove room for a softened version. The crowd tightened. Phones came out. Mrs. Larkin's voice scratched across the courtyard. "Isn't she his ex? I thought they'd split last summer." The murmur turned to a low roar of renewed attention. Jason pushed his shoulder forward, a practiced motion. "Emily, we never meant to." "You never meant to what?" she demanded. "Make sure I wasn't invited." Hide the locket in your bag. Each question drew a new flush onto someone's face. The town had ways of remembering small cruelties and turning them into proof. Sarah's hands trembled where she held her clutch. I found it after the party, she said, voice quick. Jason didn't know. I kept it because I thought that. You thought what, Sarah? Emily. Her jaw worked. You thought you'd carry it to show him. You thought you'd keep our things and then marry him in the same town square. An argument broke into several quick exchanges with three speakers trading short lines. Emily, listen, Jason. Jason, you told me you loved me, Emily replied. Emily. That's not how Jason started. Sarah, did you promise him, Mrs. Larkin? Sarah answered. I didn't plan this. I want the truth. Emily, tell us the truth now. The group paused, and for a moment there was only breathing. Sarah's voice was low and precise. I found the locket after your fight, Emily. He wanted something steady. I could help. I kept the locket because I thought it would. Marla shoved a phone across the flour, smudged counter while a dozen customers waited for their coffee. The clip started without a handshake. White Isle brass bells, Jason stepping from the church doorway with Sarah's palm in his. Shame hit Emily in the chest like a hard fist. Betrayal settled behind her ribs and pushed her forward. She kept her hands on the counter to stop them from shaking. Marla pressed her mouth into a line. They've put it up everywhere. It's on my feed. Marla's voice came low and sharp. She said Emily's name because she could not say what she meant. Customers slowed. A man at the end of the line turned his head. Marla tapped the screen again. The clip looped where Jason smiled, the camera catching the small dimple that used to make Emily laugh. Emily wiped her hands on her apron and stayed where she was. She did not ask for privacy. She did not want it either. She let the video play while she kept making sandwiches. Each motion was exact, the routine she had learned in years of mornings: slice, spread, fold, wrap. Her chest tightened. She pressed her thumb to her lip without thinking. The shame made her measure every breath. Customer cleared his throat. Is that? He began. He did not finish. Everyone in the shop was watching a private life become public. Emily heard her name more times than she expected. Emily, someone said like a verdict. She folded a paper bag around a loaf and forced air into a steady exhale. Pastor Reed stood in the doorway like a man who had been called to give out judgment without wanting to. We all make mistakes, he said. His voice rolled around the room and landed on Emily like a small, unwanted object. She answered only with a nod and a tight, automatic smile. That smile had kept customers calm for years. Today it felt like a costume. Outside, voices sharpened. A woman with a baby in a stroller muttered to her friend. Marla set a coffee on the counter and stepped in front of Emily, as if to block the doorway. Go out and breathe, Marla. Emily let her. She stepped onto the sidewalk where the late morning sun had already warmed the bricks. On the opposite side of the street, Jason stood under the elm by the post office. He had his hands in his pockets and kept glancing down at his wedding band. He looked like a man trying to hold a posture and failing at the edges. Emily saw him and did not step toward him. Her face went still. She exhaled again, and the air came out in a slow, shallow sound. Jason lifted his chin as if to signal ease, then turned away when their eyes met. He nothing. A small child waved at him, and he managed a practiced smile. Emily felt the first shift. Shame tightened into a hard, hungry anger. She had held herself in the bakery by duty. Now something in her wanted words to land clean and true. Pastor Reed tried to approach. Emily, he said, hands raised like a man offering a benediction. She stepped back. Don't, she said. The word was small but steady. She turned and walked to the back alley where the town posted its notices. A neighbor leaned from a porch and hissed. You should have spoken up sooner. Emily pressed her palm flat against the rough wood of the fence and counted to 5. At noon, Sarah knocked on Emily's apartment door and waited. Her knock had a steady rhythm. Emily opened the door a fraction and let the cool apartment air meet the warm chaos outside. Sarah came in carrying a small boxed cake and the careful posture of someone delivering good news. Emily, Sarah, and then paused as if searching for the right tone. I wanted to see you. Sarah's voice was controlled, the same measured voice that softened before she smiled at everyone in church. Emily kept the door in her hand and let it be a barrier. You came to apologize, Emily. She did not step back. She put the box on the hall table and kept her fingers curled around the edge of the door. Tell me why it happened, Sarah. Tell me why you did it. Emily spoke in short sentences. Each question landed like a footstep. Sarah's lips moved. I didn't mean to, she began. Emily cut her off. You didn't mean to. Emily, you didn't mean to take him. You didn't mean to marry him. Emily's voice did not rise into hysteria. It stayed clipped and hard. Sarah's hands trembled. She reached up and touched the pearl earrings that matched the ones Emily had once admired. I loved him, Emily. Sarah, I loved him slowly while you were busy. She did not finish that sentence. Emily felt a second shift. Anger loosened into a cold, calculating hurt. She watched Sarah fiddle with her wedding band. You remarried now, Emily, so why are you here with cake? The question had an edge. The apartment clock ticked in the background like a metronome. Marla hovered near the window. We all saw the clip, she said. We tried to give you space. Marla's use of we felt like a small accusation. Emily stepped back through the doorway and let herself breathe in the small hallway. Don't tell me what people think, she said. Tell me what you did, Sarah. Tell me who asked who. Her words left no room for vague answers. Sarah's eyes landed on Emily's hands, then on the dainty silver locket at Emily's throat. He was confused. Sarah, he couldn't promise what he wanted. She stopped and looked down at her own hands. I didn't push him at first. But he came to me when he said he couldn't be with you. He was done. Emily, he asked me to stand with him. Sarah's voice found a softer pitch. Emily watched her carefully. Emily stepped back as though struck. She pressed her thumb to her lip the way she always did when holding back the words that hurt. The room narrowed to the measures of people's breathing and the cake box on the table. You let him. Emily. You let him marry you while he was still with me. You let him walk out of our life, and into your arms. The sentence was a single, small line of accusation. Sarah's eyes filled, but she did not lower them. Jason, he couldn't face what he was feeling, she said. He needed someone steady. He wanted safe. I didn't start it, I was the one he kept coming back to. Sarah's rhythm faltered. She pinched the edge of the cake box until her knuckles whitened. Emily felt the town's gossip shift under her like a tide. It had been easy to imagine a private wound. It was harder to hold her dignity when it had a public face and a name. She left before the words could turn into a fight. On the sidewalk she met Liam, who worked at the hardware store and had a pair of oily rags in his back pocket. Liam. He held out his hand with a stack of papers and his phone. Look at this. He pushed the phone forward so she could see a string of messages and a photograph. The messages were short, times, places, the kind of small logistics lovers write when they try to be unnoticed. The photo showed Jason and Sarah at a coffee cart 2 months earlier, their hands nearly touching. Emily read the words out loud. Meet me at the square. I can't tell her yet. Tonight. She did not read with wonder. She read like someone cataloging evidence. A third emotional shift arrived. Hurt turned into fierce clarity. A thought tightened into a plan. She would not let the town write the whole story. They moved to the diner at 2 in the afternoon because it was neutral ground. Jason sat in a corner booth with his back straight and his watch visible. Emily slid into the opposite seat and placed the printouts on the table like a charge. Jason, she said. Explain these. Her tone was plain. Jason picked up a napkin and tore it into strips. Emily, you don't understand, he began. Jason, she said, putting his name between the words like a lock. When did this start? Her voice stayed brief. His fingers flipped the napkin like a man stalling for time. He avoided her eyes. Things were messy for me. I felt pressure at work. I thought I needed someone who could stand beside me. He had fast and tried to sound reasonable. Jason, Emily repeated. Why didn't you tell me? She watched him rearrange his posture, watch him clear his throat, watch the mechanical signs of a man retreating into a practiced answer. A waitress refilled coffee without looking directly at them. Patrons hovered in the background. Emily set a printed message on top of his hand. You called her at night while I was asleep, she said. You didn't know where we stood. You were sorry you couldn't be what I needed. Then you asked her to be with you. Isn't that right? The question was a line drawn on the table. Jason's jaw tightened. Emily, he started, then he stopped. His hands made the same small gesture he used when avoiding eye contact. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was sparing you a messy ending. He gave a short, broken laugh. I wanted to avoid a scene. I was afraid of making things worse. His voice lost warmth behind the words. You were protecting yourself, Emily, not me. The diner grew quiet around their exchange. A man at the counter said, You two going to sort this or what? Jason looked up like someone caught mid-script. Emily felt the crowd as an instrument tuned to her humiliation. Liam slid the photo across the table. There's more, he said. I saved the messages. She pressed. He answered. You deserve the truth. Emily's fingers closed over the paper. She felt the small hardness at the base of her throat that meant she was close to shouting. She did not shout. She set the messages down and exhaled. We were going to the square, she said now. All of us. They walked through Main Street, and people parted like a corridor. Emily could see the wedding guests moving in a slow cluster near the church steps. Their laughter felt brittle from this angle. Sarah and Jason noticed them and froze. Sarah's hand found Jason's wrist. He did not pull away. Emily's feet made small, deliberate steps toward the town green bench area where the fountain had been repaired last year. When they reached the green, people gathered as if drawn by an appointment. Marla stood at the edge, a folded handkerchief at her mouth. Liam took position beside Emily and set the messages on the bench. Tell them, he said, tell them the truth about those nights. His voice was low, urgent. Emily stood and faced them. Jason Alden, she said. Her voice rang out in the square. She did not shout. She pronounced his full name the way people do when they want the town to know a man is accountable. Sarah's fingers tightened on Jason's arm. Jason, when you told me you were confused, did you mean you were seeing someone else? Emily's question was direct. Heads tilted, conversation stilled. Jason's face flushed. Emily, that's not fair, he began. He tried to reach into a speech about pressure, about heat and confusion, about poor timing. Emily cut him off with a small, steady motion. People saw the clip, Jason. People ask why the ceremony began like that. They want to know if you left me for loyalty or for someone else. She kept her sentences short and hard. Sarah's mouth opened and closed. I told him to stop, she said. He couldn't. He was drowning in doubt, her hands folded like a woman folding pages of fragile paper. I didn't set out to hurt Emily. Her phrasing was a defense that also read as an admission. The atmosphere changed when Marla stepped forward and announced. Liam found messages that showed dates and times. He found a photo at the coffee cart. The square murmured. Someone shouted, show us! Liam held the phone up and the town leaned forward. The evidence landed like a physical object on the grass. Jason's face went grey. He pulled at his collar and reached for explanations that would not stand. The back and forth accelerated. Liam, these aren't accidental meetings, these are plans. He met you while he had Emily, Marla. We all thought Jason was a decent man. We saw what we wanted to see. The crowd's sympathy shifted visibly in Emily's favor. Sarah stepped between Jason and Emily. Emily, please, she said. You don't have to. Emily pushed past her. The push was small and deliberate. No, Sarah. Emily, you tell me now. Not excuses. Their exchange became sharp and short. 3 lines of quick dialogue that moved like a blade. I told him I loved him. Sarah insisted. I told him I wanted to build something. He was afraid of losing what he had with you. Jason tried to speak then, but Emily struck with another question. Did you know he was still with me when you met? She asked. The single question hung and forced a collapse into clarity. Jason folded his hands and finally looked at Emily. I told her I was separating, he said. I thought I was. I said it to myself enough to believe it. His voice decorated itself in the small, nervous motions of a man trying to find an excuse. Jason, Emily, voice flat. You called me your future last winter. You mean you wanted a house? When did that future change? The square waited for an answer. He closed his mouth. His shoulders dropped and he said, I don't have a clean answer, Emily. I'm sorry. The apology did not land. It hung between the 3 of them. A woman in the crowd cried out, You left her! Someone else hissed a quiet curse. The town that had once brushed clothes now took sides openly. A child in the square asked a question about the fountain, and the sound cut through like a small bell. Emily turned her face away from the crowd and toward the bench where the messages lay. She felt a tide of resolve rise without a speech. She did not raise her voice. I am not asking you to divorce him. I am asking for the truth to be told so I can decide what I do next. The sentence was concrete and physically simple. Jason's mouth opened to protest. Sarah's eyes went wide and wet. Liam stood steady beside Emily and set his hand on the bench, fingers splayed over the messages like a claim. Marla called out the names of people who said they would support Emily if she wanted to press charges of deceit. Statements about law and vows hung in the air like newly posted notices. A small public argument followed. 3 to 6 short exchanges where voices rose and fell and accusations landed. You promised me marriage. Emily, you promised me a future! Jason replied with clipped lines about fear and pressure. Sarah answered with lines that tried to make guilt into confusion. The town listened and judged in equal measure. At dusk, Emily turned away before it could become spectacle. She left the square with Marla and Liam walking on either side. People called out fragments of sympathy and condemnation as they passed. Emily kept the pace measured. The final shift came quietly. Exhaustion settled over defiance. She closed the apartment door behind her and walked to the window where streetlights made gold ribbon on the sill. She set the thin silver band on the wooden table. She lifted the dainty locket and laid it beside the ring, each object precise and ordinary. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she placed them together. She did not speak a vow. She did not make a speech about reclaiming herself. She sat and watched the 2 pieces of metal catch the lamp's light. A knock came at the door after she had arranged them. She did not move immediately. The knock was soft and single. It was a sound that demanded a decision. Open answer or remain enclosed. Emily rose, smoothed her cardigan, and set her hand on the doorknob. The chapter ended with the door still closed in the moment she reached for it. The 2 small objects shining on the table, and the next choice waiting on the other side of the wood. Emily stood and spoke her name loud enough to cut through the mayor's applause. Jason, did you plan this? The hall fell into a clean silence. Betrayal sat in the circle of her voice and pushed her feet forward. She had not come to watch a speech. She had come to make the town see what she had been carrying since the wedding in the square. She planted her hand on the back of the chair and rose again, breath steady but voice low with held heat. Neighbors turned. The woman too rose ahead, clutched her program. A child blinked up from a booster seat. The mayor hesitated at the podium and cleared his throat. Emily's first intent was to demand a public answer. The second was to refuse the private erasure she'd been offered in whispers and small, town smiles. The emotional route that drove her, betrayal, shaped every step she took across the aisle. People had already seen a version of the scene on Marla's Flower Street bakery counter. The clip of white hazel and brass bells, Jason stepping out with Sarah's palm in his. That clip had landed in phones, at kitchen tables, under porch lights. Emily watched faces in the hall that afternoon with a catalogue of what each neighbor had seen that morning. A woman in a blue coat, Mrs. Green, mouthed, "Oh," the mayor's hand hovered over the microphone like someone not sure whether to call a fire alarm or lower the curtain. Jason Alden, Emily, and the room tightened around his name. She kept her shoulders square. She was careful about what she would say next. Shame could be weaponized by a town into pity or gossip. She wanted facts. She wanted a public answer. The first emotion shift came as anger lapped into her voice, anger into accusation, then slid into a cautious, precise demand for truth. Jason's face blanched. He moved before words came, brushing off the mayor's reach as if he could sweep the moment away. Sarah's hand found his elbow at the edge of the stage. She looked at Emily with a mix of measured shock and a small, constant embarrassment that had lived on her face since the clip spread. Emily. Sarah, voice steady but small. "This isn't the time." Emily cut her off. "It is the time, Sarah. When you marry the man I loved in our town square, in front of our mothers, it is the time." Her tone dropped into short sentences and sharp beats. She wanted the words to land like stones on a pond, not drift as rumors. Questions rained out of her in quick lines. Did you plan the date? Did you know he'd asked me to stay? Did you know he called me the week before? The hall shifted. A man from the back muttered, and someone clapped a hand to his mouth. Jason flinched, his practiced calm thinned. He used the phrase he used when confronted, an appeal to miscommunication and timing. Emily, I never meant. Emily pressed forward. Did you mean to hurt me? Her voice did not break. She matched him line for line so the town could watch how his answers fit or did not fit the evidence. That line forced another emotion shift in her, from raw anger to an acute need for clarity. She needed proof or a real apology, not the soft-edged avoidance he offered. The mayor tried then to reroute the ceremony. He called for calm, offered to move Emily outside, to take the conversation somewhere quieter. Marla, who ran the bakery and had been in the first chapters, pushed a paper cup across her palm toward Emily, an old gesture of support. Marla had become the person who managed small emergencies in town. She let Emily refuse the cup and stayed where she was, chin up, silent witness. Organizers and a few well-meaning townspeople crowded between Jason and Emily. Jason's expression tightened when hands reached for him. He stepped back toward the corridor. Emily let the crowd part, so that the push to the back hallway would be visible. She left the mayor's lectern and threaded through the rows. Up close she felt the dampness in her palms and watched Jason's posture collapse half an inch with each forward step. In the corridor a friend, Marla, slipped a hand to Emily's elbow. Are you sure? Marla, words low but urgent. Emily nodded and used the nod to steady herself. The hallway smelled like varnish and coffee. Her throat worked. She had one concrete demand when they reached Jason's small office. She wanted to know whether he had intended to stay with her at all. She pushed the office door open. The room was lined with framed certificates and a clock that tracked minutes in slow, measured ticks. Jason leaned against his desk, fingers on the silver wristwatch Emily had once noticed when their palms had brushed. Did you intend to stay with me, Jason? She asked, and kept the question short. He looked away. Emily, you know how things are. Timing. Life. No, tell me now. Emily, did you ever plan to marry me? Her voice narrowed into a precise demand. This was the private confrontation that had to resolve before the town could judge. The second emotion shift came off the earlier anger. Doubt pulsed through her, doubt about her memory of the year they'd planned together, doubt about every domestic detail she had trusted. She tasted metal, a physical response she had after hearing his excuses in public. Jason swallowed and rearranged his stance. He avoided her eyes the way he always had. I didn't plan an insult, Emily. Emily cut across him with the piece of evidence she'd been holding at the back of her chest. A forwarded message she'd came by that morning. She read the timestamps aloud, the short messages between Jason and Sarah about a date that fit neither accident nor last-minute decision. The timestamps landed in the office like a small, clarifying light. A forwarded clip from Mrs. Green showed the two of them speaking in a coffee shop the week before, smiling with an ease that spoke of a plan. The twist changed how the room understood motive. It turned speculation into a near proof. Jason's jaw tightened. You can't just watch me. Emily, I will not have this hidden anymore. He tried then a familiar move. Practiced warmth thinned into a practiced defense. Emily, you know I care about what people think. I thought that phrase, I thought, became the hinge Sarah used when she stepped into the doorway. She did not come with a speech. She came with a small, honest fragment. I didn't want to lose what I had, Sarah, and the sentence landed crooked. Like a stone that had been rolled and then dropped. I didn't plan to hurt you, Emily. I feel guilty. I didn't know how to tell you. The three of them stood in the small office while the clock ticked and the town sound muffled behind the door. Dialogue moved quick and clipped. Emily, did you think it was better to have the wedding happen quickly than sit with me and tell me? Sarah's hands folded tight in front of her. I thought we'd find a way to explain it later. I was afraid of losing a chance, and I was selfish. Her voice was short. She used the word, selfish, as if it could be a doorway into explaining the rest. The exchange made the townspeople's earlier whispers take shape into a conversation the three could not leave to rumor. Jason tried to interrupt twice and was stopped by Emily's steady gaze. The argument edged into rapid back and forth lines. Jason, did you call her before the date? Emily demanded. Yes or no, I called, but it wasn't about me. Then tell me the content of the call. Emily, you don't have to. You do, she said. The required rapid exchange, 3 to 6 lines, happened in a tight cluster. Each short sentence revealed more than the long evasions had. At that moment, Mrs. Green and Marla arrived in the doorway with a small printout and the phone video cued. The corridor filled with new witnesses. The evidence tightened the air. The townspeople's assumptions began to change in real time as the forwarded message, and the video made the timeline unavoidable. The emotional pressure on Jason and Sarah rose. The second twist arrived when Marla handed a printed text thread that placed Sarah and Jason in repeated private planning messages. When Marla spoke, her voice had a directness born of shared grocery lines and swap child-rearing tips. Jason, you promised Emily a month ago you'd talk this through. I heard you say it at the fundraiser. The statement moved the story from private dispute to pattern. The crowd outside the office door began to press closer, drawn like neighbors to a weather event. Jason's face changed in the light. He could no longer depend on polished phrasing. He admitted, haltingly, that there had been meetings, that he had been frightened of upheaval, and that the wedding had been set with Sarah's involvement. Sarah's eyes filled with something, not just shame but fear of what her choice would cost her. For the first time since the clip rolled, she named pressure. Pressure from promises, pressure from ambition, pressure from a future she had counted on. Emily listened, her hands folded into small fists. Her voice moved through quick, physical statements. She stepped forward, she leaned on the desk, she pushed the printout toward Jason. Her reactions were concrete. She paced once the width of the office and stopped with her palm flat on the certificate-laden wall. Each movement was a witness. The climax call in the town hall returned that evening. The mayor had cleared the main chamber and asked that Jason address the crowd. Jason walked to the podium, and Emily walked onto the stage without asking. She placed the documents on the lectern, laid the short phone clip on top, and looked out at the faces that had seen her at the wedding in the square and at the bakery counter. Her earlier anger had hardened into public insistence. Those were the two emotion shifts, anger to demand, doubt to exposed clarity, that had carried her through to this moment. She spoke then in a voice measured to be heard, not to plead. "People of the town," she said, "you have seen the wedding footage. You have seen the dates in their messages. I am not here for revenge, I am here for truth." She named the events, the timestamps, the calls. She refused euphemism. Her words forced Jason into admission. He loosened his jaw and said, "I let fear guide me. I made a choice that hurt Emily." The admission was not a polished apology. It was a practical answer. Sarah stepped forward and said, "I made the choice to marry knowing I would hurt a friend. I cannot undo that." "I am sorry, Emily." Her voice was small, and the admission changed how the crowd saw her. She did not defend herself further. That confession produced a sudden hush, and then a scattering of comments that felt like a low thunder of disapproval and pity and curiosity. The crowd's reaction was not a single voice. Some people crossed their arms and nodded at Emily. Others whispered about forgiveness. A few asked whether this changed any civic support the couple had received. Mayor Dalton looked at the papers on the lectern and then back at Jason. This town expects transparency from its people, especially those who represent us. I will take these matters under review." His statement had the weight of civic consequence without melodrama. The town's fabric would now have to accommodate the truth. When the tension on stage broke into the low hum of movement, Emily stepped aside. She did not need the crowd to applaud. She did not need them to hiss. She needed to see action unfold, decisions that matched her words. Jason's firm had files to sort, explanations to make, and neighbors to face. Sarah would now be living with the knowledge that her choice had been named publicly. As people left the chamber, Emily felt the third emotion shift. A carried-out resolve that was not a neat empowerment slogan but a sequence of small, practical choices. She walked to the fountain in the town square at dusk, the same square where the wedding had happened, where she had pressed her back to cold stone in an earlier chapter. The fountain's water moved in a steady, audible cadence. She sat and drew the small silver band from her pocket. It had been emptied of its private meaning already. Now it had to be placed somewhere the town could see it left behind. She set the ring on the fountain's worn rim, fingers turning it twice so it would catch the light. "Mrs. Green" passed by and paused, then spoke her name out loud, not a platitude but an offer. "If you need anything, Emily, you know where my door is." Emily nodded. She did not ask for pity. She accepted the neighbor's presence as another small fact in the aftermath. The town's next days rearranged around practical consequences. The mayor convened a small panel to review civic events and fundraising ties. Several people who had cheered for the couple at the original ceremony asked questions about donated time and favors. Jason's firm issued a short statement acknowledging an error in judgment. Sarah withdrew from certain town committees and began to attend outreach sessions with the library board as a form of local restitution. Concrete actions, not speeches, became the method of repair. Emily went back to her work schedule at the library and the quiet routine of returning late books and reshelving community histories. She accepted interviews from no one. She answered neighbor questions in person, not on record. These were actions that repaired the fracture of daily life rather than dramatic proclamations. She declined opportunities for revenge that would have kept the town's attention on scandal rather than on repair. Marla's presence shaped several specific days. She brought Emily a loaf of bread on a morning when Emily woke too tired to think of meals. She handed a flyer and said, "There is a meeting at the high school about community oversight. You should come." Marla's small, repeated acts provided an ordinary scaffolding around Emily's days. They never substituted for truth, but they made it possible to carry on. Once walking the main street, Emily met Sarah near the bookshop. Sarah paused with a stack of donation receipts in her hands and met Emily's eye. The meeting was brief, but their exchange had a few necessary lines. "Emily, Sarah, I'm sorry. I don't expect anything, but I want to try to make this right where I can." Emily answered plainly, not with a public confession, but with a practical boundary. "Start by staying away from civic events you chair until this settles. Be honest in your conversations." Sarah nodded and left. The moment showed that consequences could be concrete and measured. There were also moments when Emily felt the weight of lingering gossip. A neighbor would mention a detail she had not been ready to treat as evidence, or someone would ask which church she now attended. She responded with short, precise answers. She let certain questions hang unanswered when answering them would amplify spectacle. The choice to preserve her life from rumor was itself an action. At home she opened the locket. Inside was a photograph she had not wanted to throw away, a corner of a picnic blanket, and a younger version of two hands. She placed the small silver band beside the picture and closed the locket with a careful press. That closing was not a grand rebirth. It was an action with a clear effect. She moved a token from being a worn piece of private pain to an object she could store and examine without drama. In town meetings afterward, Emily spoke less and let others speak more. When the panel on community engagement asked for a library representative, she volunteered for a single term, intending to carry civic work without personal spotlight. Her return to public service was pragmatic. It showed her choosing a place at the table where she could influence how the town handled disputes without centering herself as a spectacle. Jason's attempts to repair his public standing came in letters, in short donations to the fund he had helped launch, and in private conversations with men who sought his counsel. When he and Emily crossed paths in person, he tried a quiet apology in a doorway, the kind that carried no audience. Emily listened, and she accepted the apology as an accounting of what had been wronged, not as the ending she had demanded. He did not ask for reconciliation. He asked for a chance to do right. Sarah undertook restitution of a different sort. She volunteered in the library's reading hours for children and helped reorganize donation records the town had kept poorly. She accepted that those small, steady efforts could not undo the wedding's hurt, but they could shift the ledger of everyday interactions toward repair. When she saw Emily at a community board meeting, she sat in the back and did not speak unless called upon. Months later, a quiet moment closed the circle. The town had stopped making the wedding the main subject of dinner table talk. It settled into a new pattern where the original betrayal remained a cited fact, but not a defining scandal that consumed every day. Emily was not triumphant in a loud way. She had named the truth, forced an admission, and then chosen actions that prioritized steady living over spectacle. The final choice of the chapter, the choice to place the ring on the fountain and to return to the work of a public life, was concrete and visible. On an evening when the square's lamplight warmed the stone, Emily walked past the fountain. The silver band rested where she had laid it, catching streetlight. A neighbor had left a small pressed wildflower beside it. Emily sat on the bench, pulled the locket from under her cardigan, and held it closed for a moment. She did not make a speech. She stood, smoothed her cardigan, and walked down the path toward the library. Her steps were paced and deliberate. The town had seen the truth named. It had watched the people involved take responsibility in practical ways. That was the conclusion she wanted. Public truth, practical consequences, neighborly repair. She went inside the library and flipped the sign to open. The last action of the chapter was small and tangible. She placed the library key on the counter, slid the donation receipt into the ledger, and set her hand on the worn wood. She had not reclaimed everything the betrayal took, because some losses were permanent. She had, however, taken the action that made the next part of her life possible. She closed the ledger and turned the lights on, and the room filled with the soft sound of pages and a few late patrons' footsteps. The choice she made that evening was not a dramatic vow but a concrete step. She opened the library and began the work of the day.